Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. We cover everything Major League, from spring training to the World Series. We've got your favorite club covered, from New York to Boston to LA. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Ridenauer, and it's going to be an unbelievable episode today. Hope everyone's weekend was very enjoyable, and anyone out there who is listening who is gearing up for school hopefully has enjoyed the first few days of classes if school has already started for you. We've got a lot to cover today, a lot of things going on in the baseball world, but also a lot of new topics I want to share and discuss with you all today. So for today's episode, I want to first get into my usual recaps of games around the league. These games occurring on Saturday, August 22nd, and some injuries to key players that could affect their season's outcome potentially. Following my recap, I will discuss the trade deadline that will be coming up here soon on August 31st to be exact, and what that will entail in terms of which teams could be buyers and which might be big sellers come the deadline. After that, I'll share my struggle squad, my all-struggle squad, I should say, players who I deem as either top-tier players or very good and well-known players that are really having disappointing and tough years and that haven't been able to get anything going, whether that's on the mound or at the plate. And be sure to stick around for the final segment here today as I'll dive into different interleague rivalries that have occurred over the years since interleague started in 1997 and which ones are still prominent today that people still get really excited for even after all these years. A lot of things have been going on this year, and one of them is interleague is not as big of a deal since pretty much every single team has been realigned. So I want to give a little hat off and a little nod to interleague play that has been going on since, like I mentioned, 1997. So I'll jump into it today with some recaps of August 22nd games, and there was a lot of really good stuff that went on, a lot of good matchups, and I'm going to start it off as usual with, the Brewers-Pirates game since I've got that set on my phone already. Brewers taking a tough loss to the Pirates 12-5, and quite frankly, this is just it's a typical Brewers team that I've noticed. It's a team that is very inconsistent. They can come out and win 3 of 4 against Chicago, and then they can go and get swept by the basement team in their division. And right there, that is exactly what's happened. Brewers are now 12-14 after Sunday's game, but on Saturday, they lost to the Pirates 12-5, making them 11-14. Pirates struck first, getting 1 run in the bottom of the first, then Milwaukee bounced back with a run in the top of the fourth, but then Pittsburgh put up 2 runs in the bottom of the fourth, bottom of the fifth, bottom of the sixth, and then 5 runs in the bottom of the seventh that really propelled them into a victory. And Gregory Polanco's 2-run home run was a huge hit for him. Jacob Stallings absolutely crushed one as well, a 2-run home run for him. Adam Frazier had a solo home run. I will say for the Brewers, Keston Hiura had a nice 3-run home run, so good sign from him since he's been really struggling not only from the plate but also in the field. Keston Hiura having a really tough time over at second base. But Jacob Stallings, great sign to see an otherwise average, or I should say, really unknown or non-existent catcher in the league is starting to play a little bit better and starting to perform a little bit better. Same with Gregory Polanco. I know that he's been out for quite some time with an injury, and really that's been a theme of his for his career for most of the time that he's been in the majors. So good to see him also getting a home run and getting a big hit out of that. But again, a tough loss for Milwaukee. Great win for the Pirates, who again we'll hear about later on in the episode, but they really have nothing to lose this year at all, with them being the worst team in baseball. Next game, a doubleheader actually, a 7-inning doubleheader. First one against the Marlins and the Nationals. Marlins losing 5-4. Washington jumping out all over the Marlins at first. Bottom first inning, they scored 2 runs, and then in the bottom of the third and the bottom of the second, or bottom of the fourth, Washington scored 1 run and 2 runs respectively. Miami did put up 4 runs in the top of the 5th, so they did have an opportunity to come back. They didn't score any in the top of the 6th, and Washington ultimately won the first of 2 games that day, 5-4, putting them at 10-13. Marlins were then 10-10 after that game as well. So Marlins have started to, I don't want to say struggle or slip, but they definitely are starting to even out a little bit because they haven't really had any sort of success that they've had since the season started, like they did, probably 2 weeks ago when they first came back after their long layover from the COVID-19 testings they had. Josh Harrison, really nice nice addition for the Nationals, I've got to say. The other day I saw that pop up on my phone, and I was really pleased to see that for the Nationals because, quite frankly, Josh Harrison, I think, is a player that, sure, he's not the player that he was back, 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, but he's still going to get a lot done. He's still going to be a great glove in your lineup. He's a very, very good fielder, but he also brings an experienced bat to the plate, which is always very helpful for this Nationals team. Really, really good stuff out of Juan Soto. Had a nice diving catch. He's actually started to get the fielding down a little bit more, so maybe I've been wrong about Juan Soto's fielding abilities. I know I've been a little bit critical of that because there have been times where I've watched him read a fly ball very, very poorly and has resulted into either a single being stretched into a double or a double being stretched into a triple, mainly out of that, lack of fielding ability that he has. But a great sliding catch by him. Really good win for Washington in that first game. And then the second game, the Marlins bounced back and defeated the Nationals 5-3. Scoreless in the first 2 innings, but the Washington Nationals and the Miami Marlins both scored in the third inning. Nationals scoring 1 run in the top of the third, while the Miami Marlins scored 2 in the bottom of the third. And it was actually a really good back and forth between them in the third, fourth, and fifth inning. Fifth inning, Nationals scored 2 runs while Miami scored 1. So Nationals started to make a little bit of a comeback there, started knocking on the door a little bit, but they weren't able to come back and get the victory. Marlins then moved to 11-10, being able to push their record back above 500, which, again, I'm very shocked that the Marlins have found themselves really anywhere around 500. I know they have not played as many games as other teams have because of the recent, because of all the testing that they had and all the outbreak that they had, but still a really good sign that the Marlins, maybe not necessarily this year, I mean, you never know, we still have about halfway through, or halfway rest of the season to play, but you never know, they could start playing really well these next 2 or 3 years if a couple guys start to develop. Corey Dickerson had a 2-run home run, really great sign for the Miami Marlins if they can get him in that lineup and keep him there. Make sure that he's healthy because he's a guy that's been injury-ridden the last couple years when he was with the Phillies, when he was with the Pirates, really struggled to stay healthy in that lineup. Victor Robles did have a 2-run homer for the Nationals, so that was a really big hit for him in that top of the 5th inning. Victor Robles I really like him. I think he's got a lot of potential. I don't think he's obviously going to be as good as somebody, say, Fernando Tatis or Juan Soto, but I think that he could be a really nice player, a really nice outfielder for a lot of different teams, and he's really good that Washington is able to have him, and hopefully they can keep him around because he provides so much defense in the center field, and he does a really great job, covers a ton of ground, and quite frankly, again, if it's an outfield where Juan Soto is, again, he had a great diving catch in the first game of the doubleheader, but is that going to be a constant theme for him, or is that going to be something that potentially is, a fluke and an every now and again the kind of thing? So we'll see what happens there, but again, it's great to have that extra feeling in the outfield with Victor Robles. Sixto Sanchez winning his MLB debut, really, really bright young player for the Marlins, has a lot of potential. He's got a 5.40 ERA, but he did get his first win in the MLB, so hats off to Sixto Sanchez. Congratulations to him. And then Yan Gomes also hitting a solo homer for the Nationals. So most of the Nationals' runs coming out of power hits, big home runs from Robles and Gomes. So, I don't want to say that they're a big power-orienting team, but they could potentially be a squad that could use a lot of power in their offense. I mean, they do have a lot of great hitting. Howie Kendrick's been continuing to produce at a high level at the plate. Asdrubal Cabrera has also been playing very well this season. So they do have that potential to possibly be a power-hitting team, but we'll have to see moving forward, and we'll also hear later about some injuries that they've had to deal with recently, especially in their pitching rotation. So the next game moving out of the Marlins and Nationals doubleheader, Angels Athletics. Angels defeating the Athletics surprisingly 4-3. Angels then moved to 9-19 while the Athletics are 19-9. And the Angels, they came out swinging first. I mean, they scored a run in the top of the first and 3 in the top of the second. And the Athletics were only able to score 1 in the bottom of the second. They put up 2 more runs throughout the game, and that was all she wrote for the Athletics. Really big 2-run double for Mike Trout. He's been playing awesome as of recently. Matt Chapman hit his 9th home run, so good sign for the Athletics that they still have some power in their lineup and in their bats, because the batting averages have been very, very down. Matt Chapman being one of them. Matt Olson, also another guy that has a very low batting average this year. Marcus Semien, another guy that's really been struggling from the plate. So the fact that Chapman is still able to produce at a very high clip and a really good power hitter in that lineup, it's going to pay dividends for them down the road, and it could potentially really pay off off for them come playoff time, because this is a team that is going to, at this point, walk their way into the playoffs. I mean, they are that good, and they've had that good of a year. So hats off to the Athletics, but I will say, my hat's off more to the Angels for coming out in a close, down to the wire, nail-biting win between the A's and the Athletics, or the Angels and the Athletics, 4-3. So really good stuff for Los Angeles. Moving on, next game, final in 10 innings, Blue Jays and Rays, and this was a really low-scoring game. 2-1, the Rays came out in victory. The 2 runs scored through the first 9 innings were in the 5th inning. Toronto scored 1 in the top of the 5th, and Tampa Bay scored 1 in the bottom of the 5th. And then Tampa Bay scored that deciding run in the bottom of the 10th. Really big hit by Kevin Kiermaier, walk-off single for him. Aaron Slegers had 4 no-hit frames. So great pitching from the Tampa Bay Rays bullpen and from their entire pitching staff, really. So really nice stuff to see that the Rays are starting to get things continuing on and moving forward, even with the Orioles starting to play better. The Blue Jays had gone on a 6-7 game winning streak. They're continuing to put the pedal to the metal, and they're starting to put a lot of pressure on the Yankees. And I really do think, I don't think they'll necessarily catch the Yankees, but if they do, they're going to get very, very close. And they're going to be, I mean, the Rays have a really good shot at potentially getting home field advantage, in my opinion. I think that they could, if they keep playing the way that they're playing, and who knows if the Yankees do slip at some point. They do have a lot of injuries. They are down right now. They do have a lot of depth, but they do have a lot of guys missing from that lineup, so that could be a really, really good sign for the Rays moving forward. But a really good extra inning game. I feel like a lot of the times that I've done these recaps, I find that the Rays are in an extra inning game, whether it's a win or a loss, but, really good start, or really good, first half of the season or so for the Tampa Bay Rays, coming out with a big win over the Blue Jays, and again, moving to 18-10 on the year. Next game, Twins-Royals, and the Twins, again, continuing their domination, 7-2, back-to-back innings. These two teams found each other in bases-loaded situations. The Royals had a bases loaded with 2 outs. They weren't able to convert, but the Twins had bases loaded with no outs, and they were really able to convert. Did a really nice job at driving in runs. Minnesota scored 3 runs in the top of the first, and then 1 in the top of the 4th, and then they put on 3 more in the top of the 7th. That one bottom 5th frame that the Kansas City Royals were able to score in, that was all that they were really able to muster out of their offense. Miguel Sano hit a 458-foot bomb for the Twins. He's been up and down this year, really, for the most part, been struggling, but it was good to see him get his momentum and his rhythm back at the plate. Eddie Rosario had a 3-run home run. Alex Gordon for the Kansas City Royals had a solo home run, so a guy that's been around in that Royals organization for many years, and he's continuing to do some really, really good stuff in that lineup. And at the plate, Randy Dobnak, I mean, he's pretty much, in my opinion and from what I have seen, been the ace on this team, no question about it. I mean, Jose Berrios, as we'll hear about him actually later on in the show also, he's really been struggling this year, and he's got the potential to be an ace on this team. And right now, Randy Dobnak's been starting to show that he's the ace of this team, still has a sub-1 ERA, still putting up some really big innings and some really big games lately. So if he can continue on, not only could the Twins find themselves in a really good playoff position, but Randy Dobnak could find himself being a top-tier contender for the Cy Young in the AL this year. So moving out of that game, over to the Tigers, Indians continuing to roll even with Mike Clevenger and Zach Plesac out of the lineup. They win this game 6-1 over the Tigers, who I know that I've touted the Tigers as a very surprising team, at least through the first 15 or 20 games. Now we're starting to near that halfway point of the season. They're starting to slip a little bit, 10-15 right now, and the Indians are 17-10. Again, the Indians and the White Sox, they're going to be battling it out for that second place spot. I really think that the Twins, for the most part, I know that there's only really a couple point in winning percentage that separates the Indians from the Twins right now, but I still think that the Twins are the better team in the long run, and I think that they're going to ultimately be the first place team in the AL Central. Now the Tigers, we'll hear about them later on, but they could be a team that potential. Well, we won't hear about them, but I now that I'm thinking about it, this could be a team that could potentially make some moves during the trade deadline. I don't really think that they would want to be big time buyers right now, simply because they don't really have a whole lot to offer, or I should say, they don't really have a whole lot of hope this year for the playoffs. In my opinion, I think they're starting to slip. So they could be some, a seller team. They could start to unload some guys, maybe try and keep Jacoby Jones around. He's been playing really, really well for them this year. keep him around for a little bit, and then hopefully, if they're able to, get some pieces for the future. And this could be a Tigers team that could be all right for the next couple years, but right now, again, they're starting to show their real colors, and they're starting to really show that they're the typical Detroit Tigers team, usually struggling. So good win for the Indians in that one. Phillies, Braves, next game, Philadelphia losing in a one-run decision to the Atlanta 6-5. Philadelphia coming out first, though, in this one. They came out to a really solid two-run inning in the top of the first, and then they tacked on another run in the top of the fifth, but Atlanta, they were able to put up runs in the bottom 7, bottom 8, and bottom 9 frame. Ultimately, that bottom 9 frame is what propelled them into a win. Walk-off single for Adam Duvall, so really great hit for him. Bryce Harper did hit a 470-foot bomb. Huge hit for him, and he's been having a really, really good year. I don't want to say a quiet year because they finally started talking about him today on TV. He's starting to, gain a little bit of traction. People are starting to pay a little bit more attention to him. He's first or second in a lot of major hitting categories this year in the NL and the major leagues overall. He's been having a really awesome year. So look to see the Phillies. I know they're 9-14 after that loss. The Braves now moved to 16-11 after their win. So the Phillies are starting to, I don't want to say they're starting to slip because they started, they did have go on a little bit of a 3-4 game winning streak, and then they went on about a 5 or 6 game losing streak. But a lot of people do believe that they could make a run in this NL East if, some of these teams have started to get injuries. Teams are starting to slide a little bit. The Nationals, who knows what's up with them. The Mets, also another team that's really started to struggle. It's really going to be the Phillies, Braves, and Marlins, I think, that it's going to come down to. And if the Phillies are able to turn things around, which I think that they are able to, I think they've got a very good team with Bryce Harper. JT Realmuto is, in my opinion, the best catcher in the NL. They've got some good pitching with Aaron Nola. They do have pieces that could put them into a good playoff position. It's just going to be a matter of if they can turn things around at the right time, and if the Marlins really start to dip down a little bit and start to, kind of derail off the tracks a little bit. So we'll have to see how that pans out, but, good win for the Braves nonetheless, a team that I always think that, they could make a really big playoff push, but it always is, something happens in that first round of the playoffs, whatever it might be, and they ultimately, are early exit out of the postseason, almost, 9 times out of 10. But I think this year they could be a team that could potentially go a little bit further than the first round if they can get guys to continue to play well, and if they can maybe get some pitching. They really are in dire need of some better pitching. I mean, Max Fried is all they really have in their rotation, and he can't just get it done himself. And it's a large difference in the amount of innings he's pitched as opposed to other rotation guys, so it's clear that he's doing a lot of the main work. So hopefully they can maybe add some pieces in the trade deadline, or maybe some guys start playing well, who knows. But again, nonetheless, great win for the Atlanta Braves. Next game, another 10-inning decision. Orioles coming out on top over the Red Sox 5-4. Baltimore starting off with the first run of the game in the bottom of the second, and then Boston responding with 2 runs in the top of the fifth and 1 run in the top of the sixth, and then the Orioles putting on 2 in the bottom of the 8th, and then Boston putting up 1 in the top of the 10th, and Baltimore putting up 2 runs in the bottom of the 10th. Really great job by the Orioles. I mean, they were, going into that bottom 10 inning, coming off a half inning where the Red Sox had just scored. Again, I've mentioned that before. That's a really hard thing for a team to do, to be able to bounce back from having a team score. I mean, you really have your back against the wall. Having a team score in that top half of the extra inning, it's putting you in a position where it's do or die, really. Pedro Severino with the walk-off single. He's been playing out of his mind this year. They've had some really, really good players. Santander hit a game-tying homer. Pat Valaika had a solo home run himself. So some really good offense for this Orioles team that's now moved to 13-14 after that win. They've shown that they've got one of the best, power-hitting lineups in baseball. They're top 5, top 10 in team batting average this year. They've got a couple guys that are, floating around with that 1,000 OPS, and have actually added also really good batting averages on top of that. So could we start to see, I know the Orioles have kind of floated around 500 all year, and they've really, they've made a ginormous jump in power rankings about a week or so ago when I last did my episode on Saturday. Or maybe it was last Tuesday, one of the two. And they were, went from 29th, I think, to 21st. So they had an 8-spot improvement, which is really hard to do. So my hat's off to the Orioles. They've been playing much better. The Red Sox, I mean, they're disappointing. They're disappointing this year. They are not good at all. But again, what are you going to do when nobody on your team is performing and 4/5 of your pitching rotation is non-existent? It's kind of hard to conjure up any sort of wins in that equation that I just described. So I could see the Red Sox maybe, having kind of a lull year for maybe a year or two and then getting back to their winning ways. Honestly, it just is a matter of getting some pitching back in their rotation, getting Chris Sale to be healthy, and then, Rafael Devers, JD Martinez, these other guys that are usual big-time power hitters in their lineup, starting to turn their, numbers up a little bit and really start to, or racket it up a notch or so, maybe not necessarily this year, but maybe for years to come, because this could be a team that, if they don't, get out of this rut that they're in right now, it could be a long way to go because, losing Mookie Betts, that's always a big blow to their lineup, and it's obviously shown, and he's brought his talent over into L.A., and L.A.'s been having a great year. So we'll see how the Red Sox are able to finish out the season and really move forward. Next game, Reds-Cardinals. Cardinals getting it done, 3-0 over the Reds. Reds move to 11-14 after that one, while the Cardinals are an even 8-8. St. Louis scoring the first 2 runs of the game in the bottom of the third, and then in the bottom of the fifth, the Cardinals also put up one more run, so that was the 3 deciding runs in the game. It was a great pitching outing for the Cardinals, pitching only 4 hits given up across the entire game. That's a good sign for the Cardinals, but I just don't think that their play right now is going to be enough. I think these teams that have missed 2+ weeks, again, the Marlins are kind of one of those teams that, it's dancing around, maybe making the playoffs, maybe not. Same thing with the Cardinals. They've missed so many games. They've missed 2 weeks of playing, and trying to dig yourself out of that hole, it takes a lot of energy, and it takes a long time, and especially when you really don't have any time to make up a lot of these games, you're kind of, out of luck at that point, really. So, but still a great win for the Cardinals. Harrison Bader had a solo home run. Tommy Edmonds, he had a 2-run single, so those were, where the 3 runs came from. But it's always really good to see, 3 runs coming off of 7 hits. Very productive offense, and really doing a nice job at scoring those runners that get on base. Next game, in a little crosstown rivalry in Chicago, White Sox taking down the Cubs 7-4. Chicago, again, also the White Sox having a great, turnaround of a season right now. 17-11 after this win. Again, those top 3 teams in the AL Central. Twins are 18-10, Indians being 17-10, and White Sox being 17-11. That's a lot of repositioning that's going to probably occur amongst those 3 teams. It reminds me of the NL West a little bit, except for the fact that the Diamondbacks actually are kind of making a little bit of a disturbance for the other 3 teams, being the Padres, Dodgers, and Rockies. The AL Central doesn't really have that 4th team to disrupt things. So I think that it's going to be more so of a three-way race between those 3 teams in the AL Central, but a really great win for the White Sox. Both teams scored 2 runs in the second inning. Top of the first, White Sox scored the first 2, and then the Cubs scored the second 2 runs of the game in the bottom of the second. Jose Abreu, again, he has been on fire. Had 4 straight at-bats with a home run. Did something that has happened very few times in baseball history. He's started to get the bat going a little bit. He started to wake up a little bit from the plate, which is always a great sign. He knocked in 3 home runs against the Cubs in that game. I mean, he absolutely had himself a field day from the plate. Luis Robert had a home run himself also. I mean, great game for the White Sox across the board. Cubs do move to 16-10 on the year after that loss, but still, again, it's a fun matchup in Chicago when the 2 teams are actually good. Unfortunately, there's no fans that can, go to the game and enjoy that in person, but still being able to get that good quality of baseball that we're getting so far with these 2 teams, and that's always a really good sign for not only baseball, for the city of Chicago also. Next game, a little NL West rivalry, Rockies against Dodgers. Dodgers coming out 4-3, scoring the first 2 runs of the game in the bottom of the first and bottom of the second. Colorado answered with a run at the top of the third, and then it was again a bunch of 1-run frames throughout the rest of the way. Colorado scoring 1 in the top of the 6th. and one in the top of the 7th, LA scoring one in the bottom of the 7th, and then ultimately the lone game-winning run being scored in the bottom of the 9th off of a Cody Bellinger walk-off home run. Yes, that's something that I have not mentioned very much this year, which is, quite frankly, very unusual considering the fact that he's somebody that is doing a lot of damage from the plate. That is not the case this year at all. Chris Taylor also had a solo home run for the Dodgers. Kike Hernandez getting down and dirty over at shortstop. Great play for him. A little backhand stop. A really good sign not only that the Dodgers have great hitting in their lineup, but they also got really good fielding. And Enrique Hernandez is one of those guys who's done a really nice job with the glove this year. So a great effort for the Dodgers coming back in, dramatic fashion and winning that game 4-3. Ultimately, the Rockies now falling under 500, 13-14, somewhat starting to slip a little bit. The Padres have started to really climb their way up back into that second place spot after slipping a little bit. So we'll see if the Rockies are able to do the same thing here in the next couple weeks. Next game, Padres, Astros, and Padres absolutely whomped on the Astros. 13-2 was the final in that one. A 9-run bottom second frame for the San Diego Padres is really the difference maker. I mean, Trent Grisham smashing 3 homers on the day. Who would have thought that Trent Grisham would have gone from really kind of the sore spot for the Milwaukee Brewers in last year's NL wildcard game to being one of the forefront main guys and main pieces to this really talented San Diego Padres team. I know they're starting to call San Diego Slam Diego, which I absolutely love. I hope that sticks around, and I hope that doesn't go anywhere. Jake Cronenworth, another grand slam for the Padres. I know that they were on a streak of games where they had a grand slam in at least one of the had at least one grand slam in each of the last, whatever it was, 5 or 6 games, I think it was. So starting to really produce a lot of offense. Astros 15-12 after that loss. I really can't get a read on this Astros team. I can't tell if they're going to be good or if they're going to be bad or if they're going to be mediocre. They can't make up their mind. I'm not sold on them. I really don't think that they're going to have any sort of turnaround of a season. I mean, they'll maybe make the playoffs just because their division is pretty weak right now, so I could see maybe them sliding in just because of that. But ultimately, I'm just not impressed with this Astros team. They make the playoffs. I think they're going to be making an early exit, really. I don't think that this is the same team that we are used to and that we've seen in previous years. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm right. I have no idea. We still have half of a season to play. So until that is played out, we'll only have to, imagine what is going to happen with the Houston Astros. So next game, Mariners-Rangers. Mariners, again, another whomping 10-1 over Texas. 3-run bottom first inning for Seattle, and then a 5-run bottom third inning for Seattle as well. Evan White, 6 RBI game. And I can't believe I'm saying that because I'm going to mention Evan White a little bit later on in the show, but he's right now leading the MLB in strikeouts. And he's the Mariners' starting first baseman. He's really been struggling. Batting 133 before that. I mean, he had a time and a half at the plate, but on Saturday it was a totally different story. I mean, you would have thought that the guy was hitting 400. I mean, 6 RBIs. Kyle Lewis had a 3-hit game. Again, another really bright, promising young player for the Mariners who I think that if they make some decent moves during the trade deadline, that like I'll mention in a little bit, I think that they could build around Kyle Lewis a little bit, but they do need to add some, much more dominant hitting and much more powerful hitting in their lineup because I think that's, again, something that they're 1 or 2 power hitters away from turning that 10-19 record around to, maybe improving it to 15-19, and then all of a sudden it gives them a little bit more of an opportunity to strike in that AL West. I really think that if, the Astros, they could slip. And all it takes is just one team to slip, and all of a sudden you've got the Rangers or the Mariners nipping at the heels of the teams in front of them. So we'll see how that pans out in the AL West. Next game, Giants, D-backs. Giants coming out on top 5-1. D-backs now going 13-15 after that loss. The Giants 13-16 after that win. San Francisco coming out with a bottom first inning where they scored a run, and then in the bottom of the 7th they scored 4 runs. That was really the difference maker again. I mean, but a really good game out of Brandon Belt. RBI single for him. David Peralta, the lone run, RBI knock for him, able to score in the only Diamondbacks run of the evening. Mike Yastrzemski, great leaping catch in the outfield. I mean, the guy's not only doing it from the plate, but he's doing it out in the field again, like Kike Hernandez, a guy for the Dodgers. The fact that the Giants are starting to have players that can get it done both at the plate, in the field, with the bat, with the glove, doesn't matter. It's a really great sign. I know that this might not be a year that they are expecting, but this could be, the start to something really good. They could even use Yastrzemski, who knows, as maybe a trade bait later on, try and get some pieces for the future, and Yastrzemski would be a really nice fit on a lot of different teams. I know as a Milwaukee Brewers fan, I would absolutely love his bat in the lineup right now, especially with Kane being gone and not playing anymore. We're going to need somebody in the outfield to field, and we're also going to need some heavy hitting in the lineup. So, Mike Yastrzemski, if you wind up becoming a Milwaukee Brewer, you've got a really big fan already waiting for you. So hopefully you do, but I don't know if that'll actually happen. So that was the final game of the evening because the Yankees-Mets Subway Series rivalry was actually canceled. Again, some COVID-19 testing coming back for the Mets, possibly some positive tests there. So good thing that they were able to, cancel the game beforehand, and it wasn't, an after-the-fact thing when they find out later on, and then who knows who caught it. But some injuries lately. Steven Strasburg for the Washington Nationals. I mean, he could be going down with a season-ending surgery. Really, really could be crucial to that Nationals lineup because Max Scherzer's also been dealing with an injury here and there. He's not been playing as well as he usually does. And Patrick Corbin also not having a great season himself. And, I mean, I can't believe I'm saying this, but this Nationals team, they just are such a head-scratcher. I can't tell what's going to happen with them. They've got good, solid hitting, but then they don't have good pitching. But then the pitching's better, but then the hitting isn't good. They can't do both at the same time. And when they have, they've shown that they can win a World Series, and we all know that from last year. But, until they can get both hitting and pitching to collaborate and work together and move towards wins in the win column, I think it's going to be a real big struggling year for the Washington Nationals. And now that Strasburg could be out for the rest of the season, that is not a good thing moving forward for Washington. Also, Bregman being out for 3 weeks with a hamstring injury, that could also pose an issue for Houston. So a couple big injuries happening in the major leagues, and who knows if Bregman is going to be coming back to full form. I know he's been really struggling this year, so hopefully, he can come back and maybe use this time off as a way to possibly figure out whatever has been going on with him at the plate. But again, he's going to be somebody that if he wants to pick it up and needs to start picking it up for his team, that's going to be the only reason or only way really that this team could possibly make a run in the playoffs and actually have a legit shot in the playoffs, because I don't think that they have any sort of shot out of the first round. So again, that's going to be an interesting way and an interesting thing to see moving forward how these injuries play out. But some of those recaps, some really good games, some great extra inning action also, and some really big whopping wins for some teams, couple double-digit wins and double-digit run performances from these teams. So that'll do it for us in this first segment, but stay right there, folks, because after the commercial, I'll return with my trade deadline talk and which teams are going to be buyers and sellers and which players might be on the move in the MLB. We'll be right back here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA, to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast. It's Jack Ridenour with you all, and in the last segment I gave another recap and rundown of games from August 22nd and some injury updates with some other major key players going down with some serious injuries recently. Don't go anywhere after this segment, folks, because later on I will share my favorite interleague rivalries and some other noteworthy rivalries that I want to run through in honor of interleague play not really happening this year. And, technically it is with the realignment, but it's a very different situation. So I want to shed some light on rivalries and matchups that otherwise don't have the notoriety of a rivalry like the Yankees and Red Sox do. So now I want to discuss the possible trade moves teams may make and which teams are going to be more likely to go all in at the trade deadline and who might want to play it safe right now. There are some teams that I think could really be on the move with trading players and possibly seeing some teams make moves that would really pay off for them down the road and for the rest of the season. Some of the moves I could see benefiting the team down the road. First one to start is the Pittsburgh Pirates. And this is a team that has absolutely zero to lose right now. They literally have nothing to lose. They are the worst team in baseball, flat out the worst team in baseball. And they've, struggling incredibly. Their lineup has really been lackluster, and I think that they could really trade a large amount of their players to potentially build for the future. So for starters, I think that they could unload either Colin Moran or Josh Bell. And I know, unloading Bell sounds like maybe a harebrained idea, but when they have no hopes of making the playoffs, and they have a new manager, they've got a new GM, I think it's a trend in Pittsburgh that should follow with maybe getting rid of some of these players that really, aren't doing anything for Pittsburgh. I mean, Bell is batting a dismal .217 with only 2 homers and 10 RBIs. And for an offense that is 25th in team average and dead last in team OPS, there isn't really any harm in getting rid of Bell because he clearly is not helping their cause. And, and of course, if he's not helping, their cause, he's not helping his cause. So, and they might as well get rid of him so they don't have to pay him anymore. And this is a team that's always about saving money and trying to, hold on to their last dollar as hard as they can. Could we see Bell being on the move? Maybe. I would not be shocked if he was traded at all. Kevin Newman is another guy I could see potentially on the move. He's also been struggling from the plate, and if they can get him for some young players and maybe some prospects, this could be a long-term project for the Pirates. I mean, using Bell as a trade piece could potentially bring in some solid hitting with at least some power and prospects, and this is exactly what the Pirates need. I'm going to keep saying that they need prospects because they need prospects moving forward. And again, with a new manager and new GM, this could be a turning of the page for the Pirates and possibly a turning of the page of their entire franchise. And with the adding of prospects and the unloading of Bell and his contract, they could get good players for the future, while saving money. And I know for a low payroll team, they would probably love that. And if this is a team that wants to be good in the future, they need to act on this deadline. And they try to unload guys before things get, either worse for them as a team this year, some of these maybe trade pieces getting injured, whatever it might be, and try to build for the future and look and really look down the road. And I know Bell has dealt with injuries in the past, so that's a big sign right there of, hey, if we unload him and he winds up getting injured before that, it's going to, again, be another guy that's just sitting on the bench and getting paid and not doing anything for us. Another guy that I like to bring up for them, Gregory Polanco. I would not be shocked, and Gregory Polanco is actually playing pretty well right now. So if I was the Pirates, I'd say, hey, you know what? He's playing pretty well. We could maybe get rid of him and get a decent piece for down the road, possibly get some sort of, prospect, maybe some decent hitting, an outfielder that's going to be a little bit better than, Gerard Dyson. I don't think he's a very good, helpful piece in the lineup, especially when it comes to batting. But I think Gregory Polanco could be another guy that might be on the move. They also need to work on the bullpen pitching. A lot of rumors have been floating around that their closer, Keone Kela, could be dealt during the trade deadline. He did go out the other day of his game with some tightness in his arm. So if he winds up being injured, you can count him out of being traded because there's nobody in the league that I think would want a injured Keone Kela, because not only could he be an injury problem, he could also be just a locker room problem. I know that he's had issues in the past on this team with another rotation or another bullpen guy, Kyle Crick, and it's been very vocal and it's been very well stated and known in that locker room that they've had an issue with each other. So Kela could be somebody that if he doesn't get his act together, and if he's injured or whatever it might be, this could be something that could really he could run into some issues in terms of him getting dealt and him getting traded and possibly moving on to a better team and having a little bit of a better situation. The Pirates need to at least keep Reynolds. I think keeping Brian Reynolds is going to be key, keeping Cole Tucker is going to be key, and keeping Jose Osuna all on the team and then build around them, that's going to be essential. And I think if they can get some better pitching too, again, I would honestly get rid of Musgrove. If you got rid of of Joe Musgrove, and if you got rid of Josh Bell, you could get some decent pitching, at least one or two, at least one solid hitter and maybe some prospects. You get rid of somebody like Gregory Polanco to boost the outfield a little bit. You could start to see a little bit of a reshaping and a reforming in Pittsburgh. You also need to keep Trevor Williams. I would keep him around. I honestly side more with Williams than Musgrove as an ace, although a lot of people would probably say they're both the ace. I would say that it's Williams, but that's just me. They need to get pitching prospects, though. That's what they really need. They did draft the number 9 overall player in the league, or in the minors this past season. So, a really good pickup for them in terms of building for the future. So this could be, a start to them starting to shop around for some young minor leaguers to potentially build for the future. So the next team that I think could really be looking around and looking to make some moves come the trade deadline, Seattle Mariners. This is a team that I think the Pirates could actually make a great trade with, mainly because the Mariners need a first baseman, and the Pirates need prospects. The Mariners starting first baseman, again, is Evan White, and I mentioned him in the last segment. He did have a 6 RBI performance on Saturday, but he's batting 133 with a 520 OPS, and he's leading the majors with 40-plus strikeouts this year. So in other words, they need a first baseman. I know Bell's numbers aren't good, but he is coming off a 37 home run season, and he did bat over 900 for an OPS. So he has the potential to post really big numbers in this league. And for a team that has the 27th worst team OPS and 26th worst team batting average, they would love to have an impactful bat like Bell in the lineup. And with a team that already has great players like Kyle Lewis, and I keep bringing him up because I really think that he's got a very, very bright future ahead of him, and we could hear a lot more about Kyle Lewis. I know we always hear about Fernando Tatis and Juan Soto, but we'll start hearing about Kyle Lewis. I really do believe that down the road. They also need some good, solid supporting role players, but they already have some really good, solid supporting role players like Dylan Moore. He's third on the team with a 902 OPS. Kyle Seager is hitting a 917 OPS with a team-high 22 RBIs. So if they add Bell and he were to get going in Seattle, this could be, a start to turn things around for the Mariners this year. And on the Pirates end, the Mariners have one of the top farm systems in the league. So they would, and they would probably love to have some legitimate prospects come from the Mariners for giving up Bell while not feeling like they have to unload too many guys on their squad. And again, this is a Pirates team that does not have a whole lot to lose. Neither do the Mariners. Both of these teams are well below 500, and they probably don't have that big of a chance of making the playoffs. The Mariners, maybe. It would be a big-time long shot, and in all honesty, if a team like the Mariners were to make the playoffs in the situation that they're in right now, this would be a season that we would hear all the time about for the Seattle Mariners, how they came back from being down 10-19 to all of a sudden go into the playoffs, this, that, or the other. But again, I think that neither team has a whole lot to lose, so why not make a little bit of noise with some big trades? The Mariners are, again, 10 and 19. They are, floating around dead last in the West. However, we have already seen how quick teams are able to turn their seasons around in a matter of a week. I mean, the White Sox won 6 in a row, gaining some ground in the Central. The Phillies all of a sudden did drop 6 in a row after going on a 3-4 game winning streak before, so things can turn quickly, and with the addition of Bell, and the Pirates have been known to unload players, and then they start to play incredibly well. Recently, Garrett Cole, Austin Meadows, Tyler Glasnow, and even more recently, Starling Marte. Starling Marte is now hitting, if not still at around 300, very close to it, if not above it, for the Diamondbacks right now. He had yet to hit above 300 when he was with the Pirates. So there's something going on there. I don't know what it is, but there's something going on where these guys leave Pittsburgh and then all of a sudden they are way, way better. So again, he could be another example that leaves and plays better in Seattle in Josh Bell. So that could potentially be something that could work out for both the Pirates and the Mariners. But the Mariners will be big buyers. I do feel that they will come, into the deadline looking to make some moves, and they want to look to try and add some power hitting to the lineup again, and they really need to try and build a solid first baseman too, because it's just a really struggling position for them right now that they need to address. And if they don't address it, it could be a really big problem for them, moving forward in their organization and with their team. But I think it'll be interesting to see. Nonetheless, I think it'll be interesting to see. So we'll see what happens come deadline with the Mariners. Next team I think that could be on the move, the Baltimore Orioles. I think this will be a huge buyer team. Why? Because they are right there. They have started to slip a little bit, and Toronto has jumped them in the standings, but they are on the verge of having some success. So if they went after a big-time pitcher, someone who is, with ace potential, they could get a serious piece. What would they have to do? Well, I'd probably say they'd have to get rid of Alex Cobb. He's been a big name floating around that could potentially be dealt come the trade deadline. And if you throw in the rumors with Michael Givens also maybe getting traded, a really good bullpen guy who's been playing great baseball for them, they could give some decent pieces up mixed in with a solid hitter, and they could get a potential ace because, I mean, they have a lot of guys who are hitting really well. So they can afford to give up a guy or two that, you know, are playing really well in exchange for potentially, you know, some better pitching, because they really don't have an ace on their team. And if they were able to get a potential ace, they could really, you know, boost their pitching, and I really think that their pitching needs to be boosted. And Cobb is a great piece to move, especially with him having a lot of deferred money that another team won't have to worry about. He's been having a great year. Givens would be a great relief guy, like I mentioned, for any team. I mean, he hasn't given up a run in 9 innings, and he's got 13 Ks. So he's moving through these innings and moving through these batters with a high efficiency rate. He can do quite a bit of damage on the mound, and there are a lot of teams that have players that could, you know, give up and move, you know, that are pitchers, and the Orioles are hitting, you know, will be very tempting to look at. So look to see Baltimore try and be big buyers come the trade deadline, trying to get an ace that could potentially, you know, push them over the top and finish out the season really strong. Another team that I would definitely keep an eye out for, Cincinnati Reds. I mean, they have not been performing to the level that people expected them to. They've been struggling hitting-wise, with Eugenia Suarez hitting below the 200, you know, Mendoza line. Mike Moustakas has been struggling. He's been in and out of the lineup, being injured. Joey Votto is not the same player he was. Freddie Galvis has come into Cincy and not performed well at all. So this team has had its battles from the plate this year. However, I will say Jesse Winker has been having an awesome year, and Nick Castellanos, he's been hitting the ball great as well. He's struggled as of recently, but he's still hitting much better than most of his teammates. They do have the 20th ranked OPS and the second worst team batting average in the MLB. So this team is really missing the hitting. But their pitching has been very, very good. Trevor Bauer hasn't even cracked over a 1 ERA like Randy Dobnak in Minnesota. Sonny Gray has been lights out with a 2.21 ERA. They have the 10th best ERA as a team. And they have another really solid rotation guy, TJ Anton, who's been a really nice addition for their pitching. So they have a few guys who are ace caliber pitchers. Matches perfectly with the Orioles, I think. I think the Reds could be a big seller with one of their better pitchers. As long as they can get a pretty solid pitcher in return, mixed in with legitimate pitching, I could see the Reds making a push for some hitting. They need to bona fide that roster and bolster the hitting if they want to try and flip the switch on their season. They're going to, you know, start to try and become a little bit more willing to give up some very good pitching moving forward, I think. A trade I kind of conjured up or thought of that would be, you know, maybe happen, hypothetical, but it would be sending maybe Sonny Gray to Cincinnati in exchange for Tyler Cobb, Hanser Alberto, and Chance Sisco. Now, I know this seems like a lot for Gray, but he is having a lights-out year, and there is no way the Reds could get rid of Bauer after picking him up from the Indians a year ago. So I think that Gray would be the one that would be moved if that were to happen. Again, that is just a hypothetical trade of players and pieces, you know, these two teams, you know, need, really. The Orioles, they need some pitching, while the Reds, they need some hitting, and they can fulfill each other's needs. This could be, you know, actually something that I could maybe see happening, but I have no idea if it'll actually happen. But I do know that these two teams are right on the cusp of making the playoffs, two bubble teams that if they want to make that push for the postseason, and especially for the Reds, who were touted as a big-time playoff team for this season, they could start to see, you know, maybe a little bit of a last-minute effort for Cincinnati trying to take advantage of this window they are in right now to try and win at all costs. So the next team that I want to discuss, and really, you know, the last team that I think that could be on the move, making any sort of moves in you know, come this trade deadline, the Atlanta Braves. The Braves are a very fascinating case for me. They always have a very good team, but they don't make a huge playoff run ever. They tend to fizzle out and not to do anything spectacular in the playoffs. I could see the Braves trying to take advantage of this shortened season, really make a push to go deeper into the playoffs. How are they going to do that? Pitching. They need to improve this rotation that has two pitchers with above 7 ERAs. Max Fried is the only serious ace option on this team. Josh Tomlin has pitched well, but he's pitched in half the amount of innings that Fried has. Fried has thrown 34 innings, and the next highest is Touki Toussaint with 20 in the third. So clearly Fried is doing all of the grunt work. He is the only legitimate pitcher in their rotation that is able to go the length and really go the distance in any game, since the other guys barely have 20 innings under their belt. dealt. They need another good pitcher in that rotation to try and bring up the pitching, not to mention they need a big strikeout guy. They have the 19th ranked strikeout numbers in the league, so a team that isn't a big power pitching team, they could use a big time power pitcher, and like the Orioles, they do have some solid hitting pieces that they could use to bargain with. Matt Adams, Nick Markakis, these guys aren't great options, but they are still productive. I mean, Matt Adams is hovering around 200, so he's not really having a great year, but he provides some experience, he provides some veteran leadership, and on a team that might have a lot of young guys in their roster, I mean, now that I think about it, could we see maybe the Toronto Blue Jays making a little trade? And here's why. The Blue Jays have a lot of young hitters. They've got a lot of young talent on their team. So they need some experience and some, veterans to kind of show the young guys the ropes. Matt Adams and Nick Markakis are two very experienced pros who've been in this MLB league for quite some time. So maybe you start to see them float over towards Toronto in exchange for a high-end Jin Ryu. Why not? I mean, if you give up maybe another piece in exchange for, because the Blue Jays just picked up high-end Jin Ryu. But if they want to have some veterans maybe develop the hitting that is really lacking on this Toronto Blue, or I don't want to say lacking on this Blue Jays team because the hitting's not lacking, but it's just more so the experience. They can go after Matt Adams. They can go after Nick Markakis. I mean, Markakis is batting above 350, so I could see Markakis being used as a trading piece. I mean, he is getting older, but he's still being productive, so some team will want that. Some team will be interested in that at least, and they could go after teams with, again, dominating pitching. I have seen a lot about Tawan Walker. He's a pitcher for the Mariners, being a name that, could possibly be dealt come the deadline, and the Braves, they've been a big potential landing spot for Walker. Walker could, he'd be a prime candidate to have, since he's a huge strikeout guy. He's got the second most on the Mariners with 25. He does have a 4 ERA, but he's been pitching much better as of late, so this could be an inkling to the Braves. Hey, they could go and scoop up some, really solid pitching like Walker. Let's go after some good pitching. We've already got some really good hitting. You keep around Marcelo Zuna, you keep around Dansby Swanson. Obviously, you don't get rid of Freddie Freeman, you don't get rid of Albies, you don't get rid of Acuna. If you're able to keep those guys on the team for as long as you can and try and bolster the pitching a little bit, I mean, that is what's really going to help. And they just need to add to their staff and hopefully boost those pitching numbers up some. The hitting is there. I mean, it's clearly there, and they can bring in more pitching to their squad. This is going to be a team that I think could make a ton of noise in the postseason and could be a team that we see go further than they really have in recent years. So a lot of moves could be made come the 31st, so it'll be interesting to see how this plays out and who we might see in new uniforms. It's always really fun to see guys get dealt and they wind up on new teams and to see how they perform after they arrive. Really, sometimes you see guys, numbers, they start to skyrocket after the fact. I know that last year, for example, when Castellanos left Detroit and he went to Chicago, his numbers inflated incredibly. I mean, they took off like a rocket ship. It was unbelievable. So it's really cool to see that they have, almost a second chance in their career. Some of these players that do kind of make that jump from team to team and then improve that much. And I like to, and again, I like to, like I mentioned before, the Pirates are a perfect example of when they have gotten rid of players, they wind up having a much better career. So we, could see that happening again this deadline, maybe not necessarily with the Pirates, but possibly with other teams as well. So that'll close it out again here for us in our second segment on the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Thanks again for tuning in. Coming up after the commercial break, I'll get into my all-struggle squad, which star players have continued to struggle, and which players I would place on one struggling team and field a 9-man lineup of the best or the biggest disappointments so far this season. Folks, it's been a lot of fun so far, but we got a lot more to go, so don't change that channel. We'll be right back here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be, visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Great to have you all still with me today. Jack Ridenauer again, and we just wrapped up discussing some trade deadline teams to watch, which teams could be buyers and which could be sellers for the upcoming deadline on August 31st, and which teams could maybe make some trades or would look to make trades as well. I want to now share my struggling squad, my all-struggle squad for this year amongst the big-time names in baseball, some more prominent than others, but when I mention the years they had the year before, and I say the year they are having now, you would be floored as to how different things can be after a year. So my all-struggle squad is going to be a 1 through 9, kind of like a typical batting lineup would be, and it's going to be various players from both the AL and the NL, so I'll start it off first. Jose Altuve. I mean, he has been one of the most disappointing players all year long. The Astros shortstop has been horrendous this year, batting .221. A season ago, he was hitting .290 or higher, and he, in the last seven of the last 8 seasons, he's batted .290 or higher, and he's batting over 100 points lower than he did in 2018. Consistently known as one of the best hitters in baseball, he's looked like he has completely forgotten how to hit. Now, I know today I was watching, today as of recording of August 23rd, Sunday, August 23rd, I was watching the Padres and Astros game, and they actually made a comment about how he's been hitting much better as of late, and he has been. I saw his numbers, and in the last 18 plate appearances, he's 9 for 18, so he's been hitting much better, but still, he was hitting below 150 at one point in this year. And I know he's known as one of the big-time power-hitting shortstops in baseball, and his slugging percentage is over 100 points less this year than it was last year, at 345 this year as opposed to 550 a year ago. He hasn't been the same Altuve like normal, and this is a lot of the reason why the Astros, they're just not having the year, and they're really not the team they were a year ago. A lot of guys are struggling on the team, and I will mention one of those players in a little bit, but I mean, it's really been a major sign of them slacking off a little bit, and I think Houston has kind of fallen on some hard times recently. But I will say Jose Altuve hitting under .230, again, that is a big part of their struggles this season. An MVP just 3 years ago where he hit .346 and a career-high .957 OPS. He has the ability to be a top-tier batter in the AL and really the entire MLB. And if the Astros want to see any hopes of, them making a good playoff run in the playoffs, maybe get a home field advantage possibly. They need guys like Altuve to pick it up coming into the second half of the season and really start to get their bats going and start to kind of wake up a little bit at the plate. Next guy, Cody Bellinger. I mean, no question about it, has he been struggling. I know that I mentioned in my recaps from Saturday, August 22nd, he hit a big-time walk-off home run, but I mean, he's 24 years old, and he's already accomplished way more than really, many players do who are in the league for 10-plus years. But this is just, doesn't seem to be his year at all. He's creeping towards the Mendoza line, hitting .209 to be exact, just about 100 points below his average a year ago. The Dodgers' power-hitting first base and outfielder is really having an incredibly poor year, if you will. I mean, with not even an 800 OPS, he's sitting at 714 this year so far, so he only has 47 total bases through 110 at-bats. Not great numbers to have if you're Bellinger, who usually is hitting, 300 or higher. Through the first 29 games last year, he had 17 more RBIs than he does this year, and he was batting over 400. So just about at the same point of last year as this year, he had over 200 points, added to his batting average, and 17 more runs batted in. So a drastic difference in numbers this year's first 29 to 30 games, with him now hitting almost 200 again, fewer points than he did last year. So a big-time difference, big-time drop-off for Bellinger. The Dodgers have not been skipping a beat with him struggling, though. But if they want to ensure that they can make it back to the World Series after getting bounced out of the first round of the playoffs last year, Bellinger needs to heat up and turn his season around to be that added offense for them that they're going to need when, push comes to shove and things start getting down to the wire here soon. Next guy, and I really hate to say this because he's on my favorite baseball team, Christian Yelich. This is a brutal one for me. I mean, again, as a Brewers fan, it pains me to name him, and I mean, as one of the most disappointing players, but he's been awful so far this season. He's been absolutely atrocious. Through the first 30 games last year, he was hitting .350, had 36 RBIs and 14 home runs. This year, half as many home runs with 7 and 19 fewer RBIs this year with only 15, and he's got 200 average. So again, another guy with a drastically different season this year than a year ago, and it has really shown for Milwaukee. I mean, the Brewers have been, having an incredibly mediocre year, playing under 500 and nearing the bottom of the Central, having your MVP outfielder and Silver Slugger and back-to-back batting champion, and the list goes on, struggle from the plate. This isn't a recipe for wins at all. Another wild stat I noticed about about Yelich through the first 25 to 30 games, had over an 800 slugging percentage and an astounding 1,200 OPS, higher than 1,200 and higher OPS last year through those first 25, 30 games. The guy was absolutely dominating last year, and he's been stumbling really bad so far this season. With almost half the season gone by, Yelich needs to get scorching hot to pull his average up to the point where it was through, the first 60 games, which was still right around 350 at 346 to be exact. And if he can get it up to about 270, 280, he could start to help Milwaukee's lack of hitting that has followed them this entire season. But if he can't get going and he continues to struggle, this is going to be a really downhill battle for Milwaukee for the rest of the season. Next guy, George Springer. I mean, he's the second Astro to make this list. He's been hitting an atrocious 208 and only 4 home runs. And again, like Altuve, he's another big reason as to why the Astros are not hitting and not having the dominating year that they were having last year. Through 60 games last year, he had a 306 average. And if he can somehow miraculously pull this average up to the level that it was by the end of, by the end of the season it was last year, and do that by the end of this season, Houston might make a cause for, or make a case for a home playoff spot and could maybe rival the A's. But with how good Oakland has been and the poor hitting from guys like Springer on the Astros, they're not making a case for a good playoff spot. Through the first 30 or so games last year, he did hover around 270 and noticeably brought up his average for the next 30 games, going up to, to that 60-game mark. His OPS numbers are also staggeringly low compared to where they were just through the first 27 games, which is, it was at 914 last year. As this year, he's nearing a 700 mark with a 746 overall OPS through 27 games. So Springer, again, he's struggling not only just hitting-wise, but power hitting, and that is where he really starts to make a difference and really be a difference maker in terms of playing and batting on this team and really in the entire league. Springer is known, again, like I said, for a lot of power in his bat, but I mean the two dominating hitters on this Astros team laboring with very poor numbers in not just their standards, but really anyone's standards. You can't expect yourself to be a top-tier team. You really can't. And a reigning Silver Slugger for the outfield, he needs to pick it up from the plate and have that, 30 to 40 plus batting average point improvement that he had through the latter part of the first 60 games of the year last year. And if he wants to, really keep his team in the playoff mix, they're going to need that now more than ever. So he's going to have to start picking up the slack a little bit, him and Altuve both, but if they want to find themselves in a little bit of a better position for the playoffs. Next guy, Rafael Devers. I mean, Devers is one of the brightest young stars in the MLB, 23 years old, someone who I think could have the potential to be really one of the best hitters in baseball over the next 7 or 8 years. He's really been disappointing this year, which has been a theme for really the entire Red Sox team. He's batted .294 last year in 30 games, and this year he's hit only .224, which has been an improvement as he was hitting under 200 at a certain point of the season earlier on in the year. So although he's maybe improved some, it hasn't shown. I mean, he's still, with a sub-230 average. That is not a great percentage that you want from a guy that batted .315 last year. Now, some people might wonder why I put him on this list, and it's mainly because of how well he finished last year and the age he's at, and it's unfortunate to see him not able to come to the table and bring what he can offer batting-wise this year. He does have more RBIs this year with 12 so far in the first 30 games or so. So he's done a better job, just a tad, of generating more offense for a team that has been very poor this year at driving in runs and really generating any runs at that. He also has more home runs through the first 27 games this year as opposed to last year where he had 0 until the 33rd game of the year, which I found very interesting. And with 4 this year so far, his power production is up. Definitely bringing in more runs and driving in more runs this year than he did last year. He still hasn't been able to get on base much, and not having his consistency in the lineup either has really hurt the Red Sox overall offensive production. If Boston wants any sort of turnaround, they will need their young star to turn things around and get the offense going here towards the latter part of the season. Again, not only him, but J.D. Martinez, another guy that's really been struggling from the plate. So they're going to have to start having guys turn things around here sooner rather than later if they want to see any sort of chance at the playoffs, which I really think is starting to dwindle day by day for them. Next guy, Eugenia Suarez, and I'm putting him here mainly because of the lack of production he has this year compared to last year. Now, his average wasn't good either year through the first 30 games, under 250 in both instances, both this year and last year. But with 7 less RBIs and 3 less home runs this season, and for a team that is struggling from the plate as a whole, I expected much more out of Suarez, especially with him having almost 50 home runs last year. He had over 100 RBIs. He had an unbelievable year. He had what you call a powerful year. 49 homers, over 100 RBIs. What more can you ask from a guy? I mean, what more power can you get out of a guy? He had 14 home runs through 60 games in 2019, so he needs to notch it up a little bit from the plate. He needs to start being a little bit more patient and really try to help add to this Cincinnati team that I really believed was going to potentially push the Cubs for that first spot in the Central. Now, not so much. I mean, with a guy like Suarez struggling, it has started to add a lot more on Castellanos and Moustakas, who was out with an injury and he just recently came back, to perform better from the plate. So, I know I know he isn't necessarily a superstar, but he is a legitimate 50 home run, 100 RBI guy, which in my book constitutes for at least top-tier power hitting legitimacy. I don't know about anyone else, but that sounds like a really good player to me. I mean, if anybody's hitting that many home runs and driving in that many runs, you've got to be doing something right. If he picks up the pace and then Castellanos and Moustakas keep doing their thing, this could be a playoff team in the serious faction. But if not, then, I mean, it's going to be a real disappointing year for Cincinnati, and I think that this is something unfortunate because this is a very small, a very small window that they have right now. It's a very small time, of that they could potentially win. They could potentially make a run in the playoffs. But I think that, I don't know if maybe this year, maybe next year, I don't know, but they have to act quickly. That's the thing. They have to act quickly, and if not, then that's going to be a major issue. Next guy, Nolan Aronado, coming off a year last year where it was a career year for him, to say the least. I think that, him hitting a career high 315 with a career high in OPS as well with 962, his numbers have plummeted in just a year. One of the best third basemen in the NL and really all of baseball. Last year he did start off struggling some, but he was starting to pick up the pace come game number 30 with an OPS of 818 and a 271 average. This year he started off incredibly slow. I mean, he's batting 218 with a 716 OPS through the first 30 or so games, and in a 60-game span last year, he hit 337 with over a 1,000 OPS and a 600 slugging percentage. But these are numbers that at this point might be a challenge for him to reach. And I will say, another third baseman who had been struggling, but then all of a sudden turned things around, who reminds me of Arenado right now, is Anthony Rendon. Rendon is now hitting over 300 after starting off hitting under 200 earlier in the year. So it can be done, and that could, it should be an example to any of these players on this list that can turn things around at any point of the season. And if Arenado turns this season around, this Rockies team is actually going to be even better than they are right now. Arenado, consistently ranks as one of the top power hitters in baseball, and with his average jumping 30-plus points between games 30 to 35 of last year, this might, show Arenado this might, really start to shed some light on Arenado that he just needs to get warmed up, and he then starts to pick up the slack a little bit. With a 30-plus improvement to a 218 average is still a below 250 average, which isn't where the Rockies want to see the average, but if he can emphasize at least getting on base and getting walks, he can at least continue to set up teammates to drive him in. And as we near the playoffs, look to see Arenado possibly flip the switch and turn things up a notch in this otherwise miserable season he's having so far, especially with the Rockies right on the fringe of making the playoffs. They just dipped down below 500. They need to start to get things back going again, because if they don't, the Padres, they're going to put them out of reach, really, and that can't happen. And as a result, it could start to get, really bad for Colorado if, Charlie Blackmon and Trevor Story don't have any help from Arenado. That's what kind of worries me about this team, is that can they start to have added pieces start to pick up the slack a little bit. I know David Dahl has not been hitting as well for them either. I know, Daniel Murphy continues to still do very good things from the plate, but it's going to be if Arenado, who's going to really, make a difference, I think. And if not, that's going to be all she wrote, really, for the Rockies, I think, and that's going to be unfortunate because they've had, a really good year so far, and so it's going to be sad if they can't turn things around. But we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. Next guy, Kirby Yates, one of the better closers in the game, is having one of the worst years and worst year differences in performance I think I have seen in a while. Yates dominated through his first 6 appearances last year, throwing a 1.50 ERA with only 1 earned run and 1 walk. This year, his ERA has inflated to a 12.46 ERA and 8 Ks. So similar strikeout numbers, but has considerably allowed many more runs this year than he did in 2019. A really good strikeout guy usually. Yates needs to limit the runs he's allowed, especially with how close the Padres are, to being a solid playoff contender. Having an iffy closer isn't going to allow you to go very far in the postseason. For a guy who a year ago threw 101 Ks and only 60 2/3 innings, which when I saw that, I said, wow, he is punching these guys out left and right and doing it at an efficient rate. His numbers, they're going to need to pick up, and that's no question about it. And I will say he does have a perfect save opportunity this year, going 2 for 2, but if they want to see the Yates of old, who had 41 saves and 44 attempts last year, they need to make sure he can limit runners on the bags and keep opponents from scoring in the late innings to solidify their spot as a real serious, legitimate playoff team. Last guy that I have to make mention of, and again, it's kind of unfortunate to bring up, how this guy's not been playing that well, because I think that this is the year that his team needs him the most. Jose Berrius. This pitcher he's got ace potential written all over him. An all-star in each of the last 2 seasons. He's been having a hard year this year, almost a 5 ERA, 4.75 to be exact, through 6 games, with, very different from his first 6 games last year, where he had a 2.97 ERA and 46 strikeouts, 13 more than he has this year through 6 games. Not to mention a totally different record. He's 2-3 this year as opposed to 4-6 through 6 games last year. Big 2 straight years from Berrios has made him a major piece in the Twins rotation. But with Dobnak pitching lights out this year, one of the few starters with a sub-1 ERA, he's starting to take that ace title from Berrios. This is a starter that needs to pull up his strikeout numbers and also do a better job of staying in the game. Through 6 games last year, he had an average of 6 to 7 innings of work at least. This year, only 5 1/3. So a drop down in durability and ability to limit offense, and it is noticeable. Averaging a whole inning less, that's a good bit, especially for an ace. And I think as the playoffs approach, they are going to need some added pitching help to surround Dobnak, and having Berrios throwing 7-inning playoff outings with 8 Ks or so. This could be a team we see in the World Series. I really do believe that. This may be a crazy idea, but they are dominating Jose Berrios away from being a World Series contender. Having him dominate, I think that is just literally the last thing that they need, the last piece that they need to put themselves completely together for a World Series run. They just need that extra power pitching to help Randy Dobnak. And when that happens, watch out, because Minnesota is going to be a force to be reckoned with. So those are my guys, and those are my players that I think have really been struggling this year, and quite frankly have really been disappointments, and they're now part of my all-struggle squad. So that'll do it for this segment. Thanks again for sticking around, but stay right there. We will be right back after this commercial break for the final segment here today, where I will share my favorite interleague rivalries, which, with the interleague still, being a little bit more apparent this year with the realignment. And, which other rivalries are noteworthy to mention that are not just the Red Sox and Yankees. So keep tuning in, everyone, because we'll be right back here on the GSMC Podcast Network.
Want to know the latest in soccer? Then listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast. From MLS, the World Cup, and the Premier League, we've got you covered. The latest updates, the hottest matches, and news on the league's top players. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast.
David Beckham scores the goal to take England all the way to the World Cup finals.
Listen now.
Hey everyone, and welcome back for the final segment here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Jack Ridenauer still with you, and in the last segment I gave my all-struggle squad and talked about the 9 players in baseball that would field my most disappointing team in baseball so far this year. A lot of stars and other noteworthy players that have been struggling mightily this year, and those struggles have carried into the midway point of the season, so we'll see if any of those said players can maybe turn things around in this second half of the season. I want to close out this episode today discussing the history and matchups and overall rivalries that have been very popular and have become popular in baseball over the years through interleague play. So interleague play started back in 1997, and baseball has started to see in state teams start to begin rivalries that may have never happened before or were dormant for many years because one team left to go to the other league. I know I have talked about the rivalries that could form in this new realignment, and I have mentioned my favorite Yankees-Red Sox moments in that most infamous rivalry, I should say, in baseball, but I want to now highlight a new facet of the baseball rivalries that exist today. So the first one that I have to make mention of, and this is one that is somewhat personal to me just because this is the area that I'm originally from, that's the Battle of the Beltways. This one, again, I've witnessed these two teams. I've witnessed the Beltway battles between the Baltimore Orioles and the Washington Nationals. The name of the series comes from the highway that actually separates the two major cities, the Baltimore Beltway and the Capital Beltway. I personally live over by the Capital Beltway, or that's where I'm originally from, and let me tell you what, no matter where you're going, no matter what you're doing in D.C., Maryland, Virginia, Baltimore area, you're going to run into traffic, and those two highways are two of the biggest traffic hubbubs in that area by far. There's about 40 miles that separate these two teams, and there is quite a bit of drama that actually encapsulates these two teams. When the former Nationals team, and this is actually an extensive history that goes back, many, many years, and it's actually something that has really kind of been a sour feeling between the two fan bases, with the Nationals recently coming back around in the mid-2000s, but it's something that has been a very souring relationship between the two organizations that goes back even further than 2005, 2006, whenever the Nationals first came to Washington, D.C. And again, there's a lot of drama. So when the former Nationals team, the Senators, moved out of the D.C. area, landed in Minnesota, and then they went to Texas, the Orioles had started to really dominate the area in baseball fandom, especially with these Oriole teams making it to the World Series and winning a handful during that time in which the Senators had left the nation's capital. Pete Angelos, now this is a name to get very familiar with in this segment because he's the Orioles owner, and he was actually very opposed to the move by the MLB to try and bring in a DC team. He said it would hurt their commercial performance, and they are not only the Orioles but also the Nationals, and they argued that, at least Angelos did, that they had started to take over the D.C. area with a larger fan base that reached outside of Baltimore. These two teams met for the first time as the Nationals and Orioles in 2006, with the Orioles' previous interleague rival, being the Phillies. And the Orioles now had some local competition with Washington moving back into the area. The Orioles were actually so adamant about the Nationals not coming to town. This is really wild. I did not know this. They decided to change their away jerseys in the 70s from saying Baltimore to Orioles. So the D.C. fans would, hopefully hop on the bandwagon and start to, pull for Baltimore as well. And Angela was very opposed to them coming to town. And their arrival in town was met initially by a lot of skepticism. And in fact, what is funny is I do fall in one of those categories of people who went from, the Orioles to the Nationals and being a supporter of the Nationals. I've always been a Brewers fan. Since there wasn't a team in D.C. until I was, in middle school, I always grew up a Brewers fan. But I did also grow up, as a little kid, rooting and going to Orioles games with my mom. I mean, it was the most It was the closest team in the area. It was the only real, hometown baseball team. So, and they were in the other league as opposed to the Brewers, so it didn't really matter. Now, as time went on and DC got a team, and I don't really root for any other DC teams, I decided to adopt them as the hometown team instead of the O's. Now, again, I'm nowhere near the fan of DC as I am of Milwaukee, but I still casually pull for the Nationals and will go to games and support them. I go with my family when I'm in town, and it's always a fun event to go. And if anybody who has, whenever games can go back up, and if you ever are thinking about going to, Baltimore and Washington and go seeing those two stadiums, you should definitely check them out. Nationals Park's a great stadium, and Camden Yards, it's so much history, and there's so much, just really, I don't want to say, there's a lot that goes with Camden Yards, right? It's so much history, and there's so much, everything else that kind of encapsulates the charm city of Baltimore, and it's such a monumental and just such a very important part of baseball history, and it's one of the oldest stadiums in baseball too. So I highly recommend people going out there whenever games do go back up, and you can go to see them live. But I did jump ship from the Orioles to the Nationals, so I do fall in that classification that Angelos was worried about, those people that were Orioles fans that then decided to root for the Nationals. Now, when the vote came to bring DC a team, it was unanimous, and the lone opposition vote came from Angelos. So he was really opposed to having the Nationals come into town. And when researching this matchup, there is an awful lot about how much deep-seated resentment the two teams have for each other, between TV right deals going bad with the Mid-Atlantic Sports Network broadcasting station that they have that has really kind of become, I don't want to say a tool, or kind of a vessel, but this has really been what they have fought over for the last 10 years or so. And there's been a lot of issues going back and forth. The two ownerships do not like each other very much, and they're not very happy about the broadcasting rights. And it has brought fuel to the fire for the two teams. In the first season, the two teams played as regional rivals, Nationals versus Orioles, the first time that ever happened. The season matchup was an even 3-3 split. The Nationals, however, would come back the next year to win 4 of 6 matchups between the two and lead the new head-to-head record between the two teams 7-5. The next year, each team would add 3 wins to make it 10-8 in favor of DC. But the next few years were highlighted by series wins by the Orioles. From about 2009 to 2016, the Orioles won the season matchups 4-2 or 3-1 every year except for 2011. The record between the two currently is 46-35 in favor of the O's. Overall, including when the Nats were the Expos, it's actually 51-44. But, again, I count from 2006 to present. This is a matchup that a lot of people say isn't really a rivalry, though. Because of the close proximity and feud the two have, it's actually become a bigger rivalry and has started to grow in popularity over the years. It's always great seeing the two teams battle it out because there is some, resentment from the two fans. And being in that atmosphere at Nationals Park, it's pretty intense, but it makes for a great series rivalry in interleague play. The next one, the I-70 series, a battle between two Midwest teams, the Cardinals and the Royals. It's again a rivalry that is separated by a highway system, this one being I-70 in Missouri. These two actually started their rivalry in 1985 with the World Series. Interestingly enough, the World Series is what kicked off this rivalry, a series that featured the Royals winning in 7 games 4-3 to start what would become a long-lasting rivalry between the two foes. These two teams wouldn't play each other until the 1997 and have played each other ever since. The Cardinals would win the first season series between the two teams, winning 2 games out of 3, but the Royals would win 4 of the next 6 matchups over the next 6 games. 6 years. 3 in 1998 and 3 in 1999. The series was pretty even leading up to 2004, but once 04 hit, that's where things really started to go and go in favor of St. Louis. Cardinals would win all 3 against Kansas City in 2004. They'd win 2 of 3 in 2005 and 4 of 6 in 2006. Before the two teams tied each other in wins with a 3 apiece in 2003, the Cardinals, for the most part, have dominated the matchup. I mean, they're right now leading the Royals 65-46 overall, so 65 wins against the Kansas City Royals. That's a pretty good number to, start with in kind of I don't want to say a new rivalry because this isn't something that's new, but it's something that, everything from 97 on to now, it's, not that long ago. So a semi-new rivalry that's actually gone on year after year instead of just from, 1985 and then taking a 30-year gap from, or 12-year gap, I should say. So, a little bit different. The Royals have won, I will say, the Cardinals have won a substantial amount of World Series over the Royals, but the Royals have won 2 of the 3 World Series they have played in. Cardinals have won 11 out of the 19 that they've made, so again, 2, for the most part, winning franchises in their respective realm, if you will, since the Royals are not as big of a market team as the St. Louis Cardinals is. But still, it's an impressive way to start the rivalry with a World Series matchup. And I could only imagine living in that area during the summer of '85 with those two teams dominating their respective leagues and then meeting up in the Fall Classic. I mean, imagine driving on I-70 every single morning going to work and you see half the cars with Royals bumpers bumper stickers and the other half with Cardinals bumper stickers. I mean, that probably made for a very interesting drive to and from work if you worked in that general area. And, let's say you were a Royals fan or you worked with a lot of Cardinals fans or whatever. I'm sure there was a lot of division in that city amongst fans. And again, I could only imagine, what the two fan bases thought of each other and how they were able to, really interact. I mean, it's a very die-hard and a very passionate sports area down there. So could that possibly have, caused any sort of rifts between the fan bases? Maybe, but I mean, you never really see anything. You never really hear anything about the two fan bases going at each other. But again, it probably would have been very interesting to live in Kansas City or St. Louis during those, years where they were rivals and still are. But again, this was a rivalry that will continue on for many years, and who knows? I mean, could one day meet up in the World Series again? That would be a great way and a great I don't want to say story to write, but I mean it would be a very interesting rivalry to dive into and investigate, just with, again, everything that started from being in a World Series to now no longer really being a World Series dominant matchup between the two teams, because Interleague is much more prominent now and whatever else. But again, it would be fun to see those two teams again in the World Series. I'm sure it will happen one day. Who knows when? The next one, Subway Series. I mean, probably one of the most famous interleague rivalries. The Mets and the Yankees, they aren't even separated by a highway, but rather a subway system. They're in the same city. These two teams have had some really good head-to-head matchups before, but the Yankees dominated this rivalry for the early part of it and really for the entire way of it, honestly. The Yankees won the season matchup five of the first 8 seasons that the two teams played each other. So through those first 8 seasons, the Yankees are dominating. The two teams, like the Royals and the Cardinals, they met in the 2000 World Series, where the Yankees would win the series 4-1 to claim themselves as really the king of New York. This marked the first time that there was a Subway Series World Series in New York since the 1956 World Series between the Yankees and between the Dodgers and the Giants. So, easily, almost 50 years that had happened, and being able to now, the new look, Yankees, or the Yankees and the Mets now, it's interesting to see that dichotomy now from, then to now, and, even, in 2000, really. The Mets have only won the season head-to-head matchup 3 of the 20-plus seasons the two teams have played each other since Interleague has started. So again, right there, you see the dominance of the New York Yankees. And in that 2000 World Series, there was actually a lot of turmoil between the two teams when Roger Clemens, who was pitching for the Yankees, had a brawl with the Mets catcher Mike Piazza, Hall of Fame catcher for them. That sparked an in-city feud between the two franchises. But since then, there hasn't really been anything that severe, and nothing to that severity that has occurred between the two teams. But again, this is a rivalry that will always live on and continue on, because the two teams have shared the same city together, and not to mention, it's one of the most passionate sports cities in all of America. So I could only imagine what a Yankees-Mets game is like. And I will tell everybody at home, if anybody has ever gone to a home game wherever you live and the Mets come into town, for whatever reason, the Mets fans travel very well, and Yankees fans travel really well. So again, I could only imagine what those two teams, when they go to their respective ball fields and they play each other, at Yankee Stadium or at Citi Field, it's got to be a very interesting just look. Not only if you're obviously watching it on TV, but if you're in the stands, you just see Mets and Yankees fans everywhere. I mean, it's probably a lot of people that you personally know and you're running into. So I could only imagine what would happen if they met up again in the World Series, and there was any sort of big time build up with anything that had led up to it, any sort of jarring or any sort of, trash talking that went on or anything, and then they go into the World Series one year. That would probably make for a really, really cool season and a really great way to cap off the year, having two teams that aren't really that big of fans of each other and meeting up in the World Series, especially if you live in the same city. I mean, that has got to be such a wild, wild thing to witness if you're just somebody living in New York, really. So the last one that I want to discuss is the Lone Star Series. Now, this is a very unique rivalry between these two teams, because this is a matchup that actually started as an interleague rivalry, but has now become an in-league rivalry since both teams have moved into the same division. This is an interesting rivalry because they award the winner a trophy, actually, a silver boot to be exact, and if there was ever a tie in the series, then they would look to the runs to see which team, would be the winner of the series of the trophy. Another interesting fact is that both the Astros and the Rangers retired the same player's number. Nolan Ryan, who we all probably should know or do know, who had incredible careers with both teams. Hall of Fame pitcher, had an unbelievable run with both franchises, and I really like this one, mainly because they have a trophy for the game, and you really don't see that in baseball. That is something you see more in, college football, and with that factor, having a trophy, I think it makes the game of baseball a little bit more competitive for the rivals, because it would make the teams play for something. The Lone Star Series didn't actually come into fruition until the 2001 season. Since the two teams were the only representatives of the Lone Star State, they figured that they would have something to commemorate that by. These teams, however, they never really, have read too much into the rivalry. The fans never really have. The players never really have. But these teams don't, again, they don't have any deep-seated animosity against each other like the Nationals and the Orioles do, but they still want to win, and they still want to give the fans, a good show. And I think that it is kind of an interesting, fun rivalry down in Texas, especially if you throw in the fact that there is a trophy involved. The Astros eventually moved into the AL in 2013, so the rivalry is now, not only an in-league rivalry in the AL, but now a divisional rivalry because now both teams are in the AL West. In the 2000s, the Rangers just eked past the Astros with a 28-win margin over the Astros, who had 26 against their state rival. In the 2010s, the Rangers continued to dominate with an 87-64 overall record in the decade against the Astros. Now, Houston in recent years, has been much better, but the Rangers in the beginning of the 2010s had a really good run making it to the World Series in back-to-back seasons, and the Astros have also seen themselves in recent World Series, and actually won a World Series at that. This is definitely a matchup I was caught by because of that trophy, and to be honest with you, I would love to see baseball teams start to implement more trophy-like incentives for winning. So, like for the I-70 battle, maybe something as an homage to barbecue, since that is a big barbecue area in Kansas City and St. Louis. For the Orioles and Nationals, you could use maybe a rendering of the Beltway, maybe give an actual belt to teams with the two cities, city outlines on it to make it more of a play on the Beltway, with giving a belt as, a trophy almost, or as a prize. But I think no matter what, the implementation of trophies in these rivalries, I think would make it super cool and add a dynamic to the sport that does not have that really. And I think, again, if you start to add, maybe for the Brewers and the Cubs, I mean, that's not an interleague rivalry, but that's a rivalry that, again, is, separated by a highway. I don't know if you would do something with, Milwaukee is known for beer and brats, and, Chicago kind of, maybe do a little play on that. I don't know, but I think that if you start adding a little bit of, an incentive, hey, this team gets a trophy, this team gets this team gets that, if they win the head-to-head matchup in a rivalry, I think it would add something to baseball that it doesn't have, and I think it would bring in, that added sense of rivalry that I think that's why college football has that, right? Because you have that trophy, you're playing for something, not just to win, but also you want to bring that trophy back to, in college football, your respective campus. Now for baseball, you want to bring that to your respective city and let people know, hey, we're the in-state champions in baseball, we're the better in-state team. So I think that if baseball continues on with these interleague rivalries and these in-state rivalries, I think that they should start allowing teams to use trophies like the Lone Star Series. So that'll wrap it up for us here today on the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Again, really appreciate everybody tuning in. Thanks so much for doing it. And again, thank you for listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'd like to ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show and write a nice review. That really helps us. Again, we're always looking for that feedback, for anything that you have, any sort of tidbits or any sort of tips that you would like to share with us, because we all just want to continue to get better and continue to improve. Also, if you can please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. That would also really help us out a lot. We'll be able to share any new and latest content and episodes with you all and keep you all clued into what's going on the GSMC Baseball Podcast and really all other GSMC podcasts through the entire network. Again, thank you so much, everyone, for joining me today, and until next time, have a great day.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.